I thought the hardest part of moving into my crush's dorm would be hiding my racing heart, until I woke up with his heavy arm pinned across my chest, his deep voice vibrating against my ear, growling that I wasn't allowed to leave this bed, ever. If you want to know how I ended up practically trapped in the bed of the most intimidating, powerful guy on campus, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and comment down below what you would do in my situation. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single second of this. Part 1. The Alpha's Trap. It all started on a freezing Tuesday evening. My name is Leo, and up until that point, my life at the elite St. Jude Academy had been a masterclass in staying invisible. I had to be. In a school run by legacy families, heirs to unspeakable fortunes and shadowy syndicates, keeping your head down wasn't just advice. It was a survival tactic. It was even more crucial for me because I was an Omega who hadn't officially registered my status. I took scent blockers religiously, blending into the background, focusing entirely on my studies. But then, the housing administration made a clerical error. I had returned from the library to find my meager belongings packed into crisp, black boxes sitting in the hallway. A stern-faced man in an impeccably tailored suit handed me a new keycard. "Room 402, he had said, his voice leaving absolutely no room for argument. Mr. Vance requested a new roommate. Julian Vance. Just hearing his name sent a shiver down my spine that was equal parts sheer terror and undeniable thrill. Julian wasn't just the most breathtaking guy on campus. He was the undisputed apex predator of St. Jude, an alpha of the highest pedigree, and the heir to the Vance family, a name whispered with reverence and fear in the city's underground. He walked through the halls like he owned the ground beneath his boots, surrounded by an aura of absolute authority. And for the past 2 years, I had harbored a completely hopeless, embarrassing crush on him from afar. We had never spoken. I was practically a ghost to him, or so I thought. When I pushed open the heavy oak door to room 402, the scent hit me first. It was an intoxicating blend of dark cedar, rain-slicked pavement, and something dangerously sharp that made my Omega instincts completely short-circuit. The dorm room was practically a penthouse. Massive windows overlooking the city skyline, dark leather furniture, and a single, colossal king-sized bed in the center of the room. Wait, a single bed? I froze in the doorway, my grip tightening on my duffel bag. Julian was sitting at a mahogany desk, reading a leather-bound ledger. He didn't look up immediately. He just slowly turned a page, the heavy silver rings on his fingers catching the dim light. "Close the door, Leo," he commanded softly. His voice was a low, resonant rumble that seemed to echo in my chest. My breath hitched. He knew my name. There must be a mistake," I stammered, my voice sounding painfully thin. "The administration gave me this key, but there's only one bed. I can go back to the front desk and—" "There is no mistake," Julian interrupted, finally closing the ledger. He stood up, and the sheer physical presence of him seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. He was well over 6 feet of pure, coiled muscle, dressed in a black turtleneck and dark trousers. He closed the distance between us with slow, deliberate steps of a predator cornering its prey. "Your old room was in the East Wing. Unsecured. Vulnerable. That was unacceptable." "Unacceptable to who?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. I instinctively took a step back, but my shoulders hit the heavy wooden door. Julian stopped just inches from me. He leaned in, his piercing silver eyes dropping to my neck. Even through the heavy layers of my scent blockers, I felt a flush creeping up my skin. "To me," he murmured, "there are whispers in the city, Leo. The rival factions are getting bold. They know who you are, even if you try to hide it. They know what you are." Panic flared in my chest. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a normal student." "You're an unregistered Omega," Julian stated, his tone flat, stripping away my carefully constructed lie in a single second. "And more importantly, you are mine to protect. I've been watching you for 2 years, making sure the filth at this school kept their distance. But now, it's not enough to watch from afar. You need to be where I can see you, where I can guard you." My mind was reeling. The heir to the biggest mafia syndicate in the city had been secretly watching me? But the bed, I managed to squeak out, pointing a trembling finger at the massive piece of furniture. "Where am I supposed to sleep?" Julian's expression didn't change, but a dark, possessive glint flared in his eyes. He reached out, his knuckles lightly brushing against my cheek, sending a jolt of electricity straight to my core. "You sleep right there. With me." "I can't," I gasped, my face burning. "I can sleep on the couch. Or the floor." "I can't sleep in your bed, Julian, that's." "You will sleep nowhere else but in my bed, Leo." His alpha tone bled into his voice, making my knees go weak. It wasn't a request, it was a law. The windows are bulletproof, the door is reinforced steel, and there are 2 armed guards stationed at the end of this hallway. But the only place you are truly safe is within my arms. If you think I'm going to let you sleep on the opposite side of the room, where I can't reach you in a split second, you are entirely mistaken. He turned away, unbuttoning his cuffs, as if he hadn't just flipped my entire universe upside down. Wash up. I expect you in bed in 10 minutes. I stood there, utterly paralyzed. My crush, the most dangerous alpha in the city, had just orchestrated my living arrangements so that I had no choice but to share his bed. Every logical part of my brain screamed at me to run, to demand a transfer, to escape this beautiful, terrifying cage. But the deep, instinctual part of me, the Omega that was currently reacting wildly to his overwhelming cedar scent, wanted nothing more than to curl up under his blankets. 10 minutes later, I emerged from the ensuite bathroom wearing my most conservative, oversized pajamas. The main lights were off, leaving only the soft glow of the city lights pouring through the massive windows. Julian was already in bed, propped up against the pillows, reading a file. He had taken off his shirt, and I actively had to force my eyes not to stare at the shifting muscles of his chest and the intricate dark tattoos that coiled over his left shoulder. I hesitantly approached the edge of the mattress. It felt like walking toward a precipice. I gingerly lifted the expensive silk sheets and slid in, staying as close to the edge as physically possible. I was practically hanging off the mattress, staring rigidly at the ceiling, trying to control my breathing. A heavy sigh echoed in the quiet room. A second later, the file was tossed onto the nightstand, and the bedside lamp clicked off, plunging us into darkness. Before I could even process the movement, a strong arm snaked around my waist. A powerful force pulled me backward, dragging me across the mattress until my back collided with a rock-solid, incredibly warm chest. I gasped, my hands instinctively grabbing the muscular arm that was now locked like a vice around my stomach. "Julian," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You're shivering," he muttered, his lips brushing against the shell of my ear. The sensation sent fireworks exploding down my spine. "And you were entirely too far away." I said in my bed, Leo, not falling off the edge of it. I just didn't want to crowd you." I lied, my heart beating so frantically I was sure he could feel it against his arm. Julian buried his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling deeply. A low, satisfied rumble vibrated in his chest. "You could never crowd me. Now go to sleep. You're safe." I lay there in the dark, enveloped by the intense heat of his body, surrounded by his scent. The heir to a criminal empire was holding me like I was his most prized possession. I knew I should be terrified. I knew I should fight my way out of his grip. But as the minutes ticked by, and his breathing evened out into a deep, steady rhythm, the tension slowly began to drain from my muscles. For the first time in my life, despite the danger that surrounded this boy, I actually felt safe. But I also knew one thing for certain. My quiet, invisible life at St. Jude Academy was officially over. End of Part 1. Part 2 marked territory. The morning sun did not gently coax me awake. It felt like it was interrogating me. Bright rays of light pierced through the massive, floor-to-ceiling bulletproof windows of room 402, casting long, sharp shadows across the dark mahogany floor. But it wasn't the light that jolted me from my surprisingly deep sleep. It was the overwhelming, suffocating, and entirely intoxicating scent of dark cedar and rain. I blinked my eyes open, my vision blurry for a fraction of a second before the reality of my situation slammed into my chest like a freight train. I was not in my cramped, unremarkable dorm in the East Wing. I was in the penthouse suite of the most feared student at St. Jude Academy. And worse, or perhaps terrifyingly better, I was completely caged. Julian's arm was still locked around my waist, heavy and unyielding as a steel beam. At some point during the night, I must have completely abandoned my rigid position on the edge of the mattress. I was now pressed flush against him, my back to his chest, my legs tangled with his. The heat radiating off his body was immense, seeping through my oversized pajamas and warming me right down to my bones. I could feel the slow, steady thump of his heartbeat against my spine. For a moment, I just lay there, completely paralyzed. My Omega instincts, usually suppressed and silenced by heavy doses of blockers, were practically purring in the back of my mind. Alpha. Safe. Protected. It took every ounce of my willpower to silence that primal voice. I was Leo, a scholarship student who needed to graduate and disappear, not a prize for a mafia heir to hoard in his heavily guarded bedroom. I took a shallow breath and attempted the impossible, a stealthy escape. Moving with agonizing slowness, I reached down to grip his thick forearm, trying to pry his arm off my stomach. I lifted it an inch, 2 inches. I mentally cheered, shifting my weight toward the edge of the bed. If you think you're sneaking out before breakfast, you're severely underestimating my reflexes, Leo. The voice rumbled right against my ear, thick with sleep and vibrating with a low, gravelly authority that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My breath caught in my throat. I froze, my hands still uselessly clutching his forearm. In a single, fluid motion, Julian tightened his grip, pulling me firmly back against his chest and erasing the 2 inches of distance I had managed to gain. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling deeply. I squeezed my eyes shut, my face burning so hot I was sure I was glowing. Even through the remnants of my scent blockers, he was searching for my natural omega scent, mapping it out. I have a morning lecture, I rasped, my voice cracking humiliatingly. Advanced statistics. I can't be late. Julian sighed, a hot puff of air against my skin that sent a shiver cascading down my spine. Statistics can wait. The perimeter check cannot. Perimeter check? I echoed, finally gathering the courage to twist around in his grip to look at him. It was a mistake. Waking up next to Julian Vance was a lethal hazard to my cardiovascular system. His silver eyes were heavy-lidded and incredibly intense, his dark hair messy from sleep. The intricate black tattoos, snaking over his left shoulder, looked stark against his pale skin. He looked like a fallen angel who had just conquered the underworld, and he was staring at me like I was the only thing in the room that mattered. My men do a sweep of the corridors at 7 a.m., Julian explained calmly, his thumb idly tracing the line of my hip through my pajamas. The casual intimacy of the gesture made my brain short-circuit. Until they report back that the path to the academic building is completely clear of Petrov family scouts, you don't move from this bed. Petrov, I repeated, panic finally slicing through the haze of his alpha pheromones. The Petrov Syndicate was the Vance family's biggest rival. They were notoriously ruthless, dealing in the kind of violence that even the underground whispered about in hushed tones. Why would Petrov scouts be looking for me? I'm nobody. I don't exist to them. Julian's expression darkened, the sleepy softness vanishing in an instant. He propped himself up on one elbow, towering over me. The sheer physical dominance of his posture forced me to sink back into the pillows. You aren't nobody anymore, Leo, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You moved into my room. You slept in my bed. The entire academy knows by now. Information moves faster than bullets at St. Jude. The Petrovs are always looking for a weakness, a pressure point they can press to make me bleed. So you made me a target? I pushed against his chest, a surge of desperate anger flooding my veins. If you wanted to keep me safe, you should have left me alone in the East Wing. You should have kept ignoring me like you did for the last 2 years. Julian caught both of my wrists in one of his massive hands, pinning them effortlessly to the mattress above my head. The movement was so fast, I didn't even have time to blink. He leaned in until our noses were almost brushing. The scent of cedar spiked, turning sharp and dominant, a clear warning. I never ignored you, he growled, his eyes flashing with a possessive fury that left me breathless. I was biding my time. I kept my distance because bringing you into my world meant painting a target on your back. I spent 2 years building a fortress around this room, vetting every guard, securing every corridor, just so I could finally bring you here. The Petrovs are getting bold, Leo. They noticed you were unregistered. They noticed you didn't have an Alpha's mark protecting you. If I had left you in the East Wing for one more night, you would have been taken. The fight drained out of me instantly. My wrists went limp in his grasp. Taken, I whispered, a cold dread pooling in my stomach. Julian's grip on my wrist softened, turning into a gentle hold. He lowered his head, resting his forehead against mine. I won't let them touch you, he murmured, his voice a vow carved in stone. You are under my protection now. But that means you follow my rules. You don't walk alone. You don't go off campus. And you don't argue when I tell you it's not safe to leave this room. He finally released my wrists, pulling back to look at me. Now go get dressed. Marcus and Silas will escort us to the dining hall. Us, I managed to say, sitting up slowly and rubbing my wrists, though he hadn't hurt me at all. You're walking with me? I'm not letting you out of my sight, Julian replied smoothly, throwing the silk covers back and stepping out of bed. He was wearing nothing but dark sweatpants that hung low on his hips, and I immediately looked away, staring fixedly at the wall. Not today. Not until everyone in this school understands exactly who you belong to. Belong to. The words echoed in my head as I practically sprinted into the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I turned on the cold water and splashed it on my face, staring at my pale reflection in the mirror. I was in so far over my head, I couldn't even see the surface. I was an Omega masquerading as a Beta, suddenly thrust into the center of a mafia turf war because the most powerful alpha in the city had decided I was his. I applied a double layer of my scent blockers, rubbing the neutral-smelling cream frantically over my scent glands on my neck and wrists. I needed to disappear. I needed to blend in. When I stepped out of the bathroom dressed in my standard St. Jude uniform, a crisp white shirt, navy blazer, and slacks, Julian was waiting by the door. He was entirely transformed. The messy-haired boy from the bed was gone, replaced by the terrifying heir to the Vance empire. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, a black tie, and a silver tie clip that caught the light. He looked immaculate, deadly, and breathtakingly handsome. He glanced at my neck, his eyes narrowing slightly as he caught the sterile scent of the blockers. He didn't say a word, but the slight tightening of his jaw told me he hated it. He wanted me to smell like him. He wanted the world to know. He opened the heavy steel-reinforced door. Standing in the hallway were two men in dark suits. They were massive, their faces grim and unreadable. One had a faint scar crossing his left eyebrow. "Leo," Julian said, gesturing to the men. "This is Marcus and Elias. They are your shadows from now on. If I am not with you, they are." "Nice to meet you," I muttered awkwardly. They simply gave me curt, respectful nods. They weren't looking at me like a student. They were looking at me like an incredibly valuable, highly fragile package they had been tasked with guarding with their lives. Walking through the corridors of St. Jude Academy had never been so agonizing. Usually, I hugged the walls, keeping my head down and avoiding eye contact with the legacy students who practically owned the school. Today, there was no hiding. Julian walked right beside me, our shoulders brushing occasionally. Marcus and Elias flanked us, a few paces behind, their eyes scanning the hallways with military precision. The reaction from the student body was immediate and suffocating. As we entered the main atrium, a massive hall with vaulted glass ceilings and marble floors, the usual loud chatter died down into a sharp, collective hiss of whispers. Hundreds of eyes snapped toward us. Students who had routinely shoved past me in the hallways or spilled coffee on my shoes without a second thought were now parting like the Red Sea. They plastered themselves against the lockers, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock, curiosity, and abject fear. I felt exposed. Naked. Every step felt like I was walking to an execution. I instinctively pulled my blazer tighter around myself, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Julian noticed. Without breaking his stride, without even looking at me, he reached out and wrapped his large, warm hand around the back of my neck. It was a deeply possessive, incredibly intimate gesture, right over the spot where an alpha would traditionally bite an omega to claim them. He didn't squeeze. His touch was grounding, a heavy, reassuring weight that sent a rush of calming pheromones straight into my system, bypassing my blockers entirely. The message to the atrium was deafeningly clear. Look, but do not touch. He is mine. I saw the way the other alphas in the hall reacted. Some averted their eyes immediately, submitting to Julian's overwhelming aura. Others stared with calculated interest, clearly calculating the political implications of Julian Vance finally taking a companion. We reached the entrance of the dining hall, and Julian finally dropped his hand from my neck, though the phantom heat of his touch lingered. "I have a meeting with the student council board before classes," Julian said, his tone entirely professional now. He glanced at Marcus. "Get him his breakfast. Sit at the center table. Do not let anyone approach within a 3-foot radius." "Understood, boss," Marcus rumbled. Julian looked back at me, his silver eyes softening just a fraction. "Eat something, Leo. I'll find you before statistics." Before I could formulate a response, he turned and walked away down the administrative corridor, leaving a vacuum of power in his wake. I took a deep breath and walked into the dining hall, Marcus and Elias trailing like imposing storm clouds. As ordered, they guided me to the large circular table right in the dead center of the room, a table that was usually reserved strictly for the Vance inner circle. I sat down, feeling entirely out of place in my cheap uniform, surrounded by the elite. Elias vanished for a few minutes and returned with a tray laden with pastries, fresh fruit, and coffee, placing it gently in front of me. I stared at the food, my stomach tied in too many knots to even consider eating. I picked up the coffee cup, relishing the warmth against my cold hands. Well, 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 if it isn't the little ghost of the East Wing. The voice was slick, oily, and dripping with condescension. I froze, the coffee cup halfway to my mouth. I slowly turned my head. Standing just outside the invisible 3-foot boundary my guards had established was a guy I recognized instantly. Roman Petrov, the younger brother of the Petrov syndicate leader. He had slicked-back blonde hair, a cruel smirk playing on his lips, and eyes that looked like dead, pale ice. He was a notorious alpha, known for breaking omegas just for the thrill of it. Instantly, Marcus and Elias stepped forward, blocking my view of Roman. The tension in the air shattered like glass. "Step back, Petrov," Marcus warned, his hand drifting dangerously close to the inside of his suit jacket where I knew a weapon was holstered. Roman raised his hands in mock surrender, though his smirk never wavered. "Relax, gentlemen. I'm just here to welcome my new classmate to the high table. We're all friends here, aren't we?" He leaned to the side, trying to catch my eye around Elias's massive frame. "I have to admit, Leo, you played a brilliant game. 2 years pretending to be a pathetic, scentless beta, just waiting for the right moment to spread your legs for the Vance heir. Very calculated. I respect the hustle." A flush of hot, furious embarrassment crawled up my neck. My hands tightened around the coffee cup until my knuckles turned white. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. Roman chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Oh, please. We all know Vance wouldn't move a beta into his private quarters. The only question is, what makes you so special? I mean, looking at you, you're nothing to write home about. A bit plain, don't you think? Maybe Julian is just going through a charity phase." The cruelty in his words stung, hitting every insecurity I had spent years trying to bury. I was plain. I was nobody. Why had Julian chosen me? "That's far enough," Elias growled, taking a threatening step forward. "Or what?" Roman sneered, dropping the polite facade, his alpha aura flaring aggressively. It was suffocating, a foul stench of burning rubber and sharp ozone that made my eyes water. "You're going to shoot me in the middle of the dining hall. I'm just having a conversation with the little Omega. I think he and I should get to know each other. After all, Julian gets bored easily. When he throws you out, Leo, you're going to need a new protector. I might be willing to take my leftovers. The only thing you'll be taking is a feeding tube if you don't take your eyes off him right now." The entire dining hall seemed to hold its breath. Julian stepped out from the crowd, his face an absolute mask of lethal, frozen rage. The ambient temperature in the room felt like it had plummeted 10 degrees. He didn't walk, he stalked forward, his alpha presence unfurling like a massive, suffocating dark cloud that instantly crushed Roman's aura into non-existence. Roman took a step back, the arrogant smirk slipping from his face, replaced by a flicker of genuine terror. "Vance, we were just..." Julian didn't let him finish. In a blur of motion, he crossed the remaining distance, his hand shooting out to grip Roman by the throat. He slammed the Petrov heir backward against a marble pillar with a sickening crack. Screams echoed from the surrounding tables as students scrambled away from the violence. My heart stopped. I jumped out of my chair, knocking the coffee over. "Julian." Julian ignored me, his entire focus locked on the man pinned to the pillar. He lifted Roman an inch off the ground by his throat. Roman's hands clawed uselessly at Julian's iron grip, his legs kicking. "Listen to me very carefully, Roman," Julian whispered. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the dead-silent hall like a gunshot. "If you ever look at him again, if you ever speak his name again, if your scent so much as drifts into his airspace, I will dismantle your entire family, brick by bloody brick, and I will make you watch. Do you understand me?" Roman, his face turning an ugly shade of purple, managed a frantic, wheezing nod. Julian released him with a look of utter disgust. Roman crumpled to the floor, gasping for air and clutching his bruised throat. Julian didn't spare him a second glance. He turned around, his chest heaving slightly, his eyes wild and dark with raw, untamed instinct. He strode toward me, the crowd parting for him with frantic desperation. He stopped right in front of me, his chest almost touching mine. The sheer violence of what I had just witnessed terrified me. But as his scent washed over me, dark cedar and rain, now spiked with a metallic tang of adrenaline, my Omega instincts flared up violently, begging me to submit, to seek comfort in my alpha's strength. He reached out, his hands remarkably gentle compared to the violence they had just inflicted, and cupped my face. His thumbs brushed over my cheekbones, his eyes searching mine for any sign of fear directed at him. "Are you hurt?" he demanded softly, his voice rough. "No," I whispered, unable to look away from his intense silver eyes. "I'm okay." Julian exhaled a shaky breath, his forehead dropping to rest against mine right in the middle of the crowded, silent dining hall. He didn't care who was watching. He didn't care about the rumors or the syndicate politics. Good, he breathed, his thumbs stroking my skin. Because starting right now, no one else is ever going to get close enough to try. End of Part 2. Part 3. The Golden Cage. The silence in the dining hall was deafening, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed against my eardrums. Every single student was frozen, their eyes locked on the terrifying tableau of Julian Vance standing over me, his hands gently framing my face, while the heir to the Petrov syndicate lay gasping on the marble floor behind him. Julian, I breathed, my voice barely a whisper, yet it felt too loud in the deadened room. My hands instinctively came up to grip his wrists. His pulse was hammering against my palms, a frantic, violent rhythm that betrayed the calm facade he was desperately trying to maintain for my sake. We're leaving, Julian announced, his voice slicing through the tension like a silver blade. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at Roman, who was currently being hauled to his feet by his panicked lackeys. Julian's entire universe, in that single moment, was narrowed down entirely to me. He dropped his hands from my face, immediately sliding one arm around my waist to pull me tight against his side. The sheer heat of his body was a stark contrast to the ice-cold dread pooling in my stomach. He turned us toward the exit. Marcus and Elias immediately fell into step around us, forming an impenetrable human shield. As we walked back through the atrium, the whispers ignited again, louder this time, filled with a frantic, terrified energy. I kept my eyes pinned to the intricate patterns on the marble floor. I could feel the hostile glares of the legacy alphas, the calculating stares of the syndicate brats, and the sheer disbelief of the scholarship students who used to think I was just another invisible ghost. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was wearing a target painted in neon colors, signed by Julian Vance. Julian didn't take me to advanced statistics. He bypassed the academic wing entirely, his arm never leaving my waist, steering me back toward the highly secured residential tower. The heavy reinforced door of room 402 clicked shut behind us, and the electronic locks engaged with a heavy, final thud. The moment the door was sealed, Julian let go of me. He paced to the center of the room, running a hand through his dark, perfectly styled hair, ruining it instantly. The crisp, professional demeanor he had worn all morning was gone. The dark cedar and rain scent that usually brought my Omega instincts a sense of calm was now sharp, laced with the metallic, biting tang of pure, undiluted alpha fury. Julian, I asked hesitantly, staying near the door. The massive penthouse suddenly felt incredibly small. He stopped pacing and turned to face me. His silver eyes were stormy, his chest heaving under his tailored suit. I should have killed him, he gritted out, the words laced with a venom so pure it made my blood run cold. I should have snapped his neck the moment his scent touched you. You can't do that, I said, my voice trembling but finding a shred of desperate logic. He's a Petrov. You kill him in front of 300 witnesses. You start an all-out war right here on campus. The Academy administration wouldn't be able to cover it up. I don't care about the Academy. Julian roared, the sudden volume making me flinch backward. In a flash, he crossed the room, stopping just inches from me, his towering frame casting a dark shadow over me. He saw my flinch, and the fury in his eyes instantly fractured into something that looked dangerously close to panic. He closed his eyes, taking a deep, ragged breath. When he opened them again, the lethal predator was reined in, locked behind iron bars. He reached out, his knuckles lightly grazing my cheek. I'm sorry, he murmured, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. I'm not angry at you, Leo. Never at you. I'm angry at my own carelessness. I brought you into the light before I had completely neutralized the threats in the shadows. You couldn't have known he would approach me, I reasoned, leaning ever so slightly into his touch despite the chaotic war raging in my head. My scent blockers were definitely failing. I could feel the subtle, sweet scent of vanilla and spun sugar, my natural Omega scent, beginning to seep through, reacting to his distress. Julian's eyes darkened as he caught the scent. His thumb traced my jawline. I know everything that happens in this city, Leo. If Roman Petrov breathed in your direction, I should have known about it before it happened. But I let my guard down because I was so entirely focused on finally having you in my bed. A furious blush exploded across my cheeks. Julian, please. I don't know how to handle this. Yesterday I was worrying about passing a midterm, and today I'm the center of a mafia turf war. I don't belong in this world. You belong with me, Julian stated, a simple, irrefutable fact in his mind. He stepped back, straightening his tie with trembling fingers. And because of that, this world is going to have to bend to accommodate you. But right now, things are going to escalate. Roman's pride is bruised, and the Petrovs will demand retaliation for what I did to him. What does that mean for us? I asked, hating the way the word us slipped so naturally from my tongue. Julian walked over to his mahogany desk, unlocking a heavy metal drawer and pulling out a sleek, black encrypted phone. It means I have to leave the campus to meet with my father and the inner circle. We have to prepare for a strike. And it means you, he pointed a stern finger at me, are not leaving this room under any circumstances. Panic instantly flared in my chest. You're leaving me here? Alone. You are not alone, Julian corrected, his tone leaving no room for argument. Marcus and Elias will be stationed outside this door. The biometric locks have been recalibrated. No one can enter without my explicit override. The windows are rated to stop high-caliber sniper fire. You are in the safest fortress in the entire city. But what about you? The words tumbled out before I could stop them. My Omega instincts were screaming at the thought of my Alpha walking into danger. If they want retaliation, they'll come after you. Julian paused, the encrypted phone in his hand. A slow, genuinely breathtaking smile spread across his face, transforming him from a terrifying mob boss into the incredibly handsome college student I had been hopelessly crushing on for 2 years. He walked back to me, gripping the back of my neck and pulling my forehead to his chest. Let them come, he rumbled against my hair. They are playing for power, Leo. I am playing for keeps, and I have entirely too much to lose now to let anyone put me in the ground. He pressed a firm, lingering kiss to the crown of my head, sending a jolt of pure electricity straight down to my toes. Lock the door behind me. Do not open it for anyone but me. Understand? I understand, I whispered against his suit jacket. A minute later, the heavy door slammed shut. I heard the electronic deadbolts slide into place, followed by the muffled, deep voices of Marcus and Elias taking up their positions in the hallway. The silence returned, but this time, it wasn't the shocked silence of the dining hall. It was the oppressive, suffocating silence of a golden cage. I spent the first 2 hours pacing the length of the massive bedroom. The adrenaline from the morning was slowly draining away, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. I tried to pull out my textbook to study for advanced statistics, but the numbers blurred together on the page. How could I focus on standard deviations when my roommate, my captor, my protector, my alpha, was out in the city, potentially starting a war over my honor? By noon, the sheer claustrophobia of the room began to gnaw at my sanity. I needed a distraction. I needed to know more about the man who had completely hijacked my life. I walked over to Julian's massive mahogany desk. It was impeccably organized. A sleek laptop, a few expensive pens, and the leather-bound ledger he had been reading the night before. I knew I shouldn't pry. I knew snooping through a mafia heir's personal desk was practically begging for a death sentence. But Julian had said he had been watching me for 2 years. I needed to know what that meant. I gently opened the top drawer. It was mostly stationery and charging cables. The second drawer was locked. The third, however, slid open with a smooth, silent glide. Inside were a series of manila folders. My breath hitched as I saw the name written in sharp, elegant handwriting on the tab of the thickest folder, Leo Astor. My hands trembled as I pulled it out and placed it on the desk. I flipped it open, and my heart stopped. The folder was a meticulously detailed archive of my entire existence at St. Jude Academy. There were copies of my transcripts, my class schedules, my medical records, even the confidential files noting my unregistered Omega status that only the school's chief medical officer was supposed to have access to. But it wasn't just official documents. There were photographs, dozens of them. A photo of me studying in the library, taken from an angle that suggested the photographer was sitting a few tables away. A photo of me sitting alone under the old oak tree in the courtyard, eating a sandwich. A photo of me walking back to the east wing in the rain. They weren't taken by a stalker with a telephoto lens. They were taken by someone deeply embedded in the school. Someone who had been tracking my every move. I flipped the page, and the air rushed out of my lungs. Pinned to the back of the folder were 3 profiles of students. I recognized them instantly. In my freshman year, those 3 alphas had cornered me behind the gymnasium, aggressively trying to force me to submit to their pheromones despite my blockers. I had managed to escape, completely terrified, and had spent the next 3 days hiding in my room. When I finally came out, those 3 students had vanished. The rumor mill said they had been expelled for academic fraud. Now, looking at the profiles, I saw thick, red ink slashed across each of their faces. Beneath their photos, written in Julian's unmistakable handwriting, were detailed notes on their family businesses, their financial vulnerabilities, and a single, chilling directive. ruin them. Leave no trace. He hadn't just been watching me. He had been violently, ruthlessly curating my environment, erasing anyone who posed a threat to me, manipulating the school's administration, moving pieces on a chessboard I didn't even know I was standing on, all to ensure I remained perfectly safe and perfectly isolated until he was ready to claim me. The depth of his obsession was terrifying. It was criminal. Yet, as my Omega instincts flared, staring at the concrete proof of an alpha utterly devoted to my protection, I couldn't deny the dark, twisted thrill that shivered down my spine. I was horrified, but heaven help me, I wasn't repulsed. I felt cherished in the most dangerous way imaginable. The sun slowly dipped below the city skyline, painting the room in shadows. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the large leather chair behind his desk, my knees pulled up to my chest, the folder still open in front of me. Every passing hour tightened the knot of anxiety in my stomach. What if Julian didn't come back? What if the Petrovs had set a trap? It was past midnight when I finally heard the heavy clunk of the electronic locks disengaging. I practically leaped out of the chair as the door swung open. Julian stepped into the room, and the door immediately sealed behind him. He looked entirely drained. His suit jacket was missing, his tie was discarded, and the top 3 buttons of his crisp white shirt were torn open. He leaned heavily against the reinforced door, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. The sharp scent of expensive whiskey, stale cigarette smoke, and something dark and coppery, blood, clung to his clothes. Julian. I rushed forward, the fear for his safety completely overriding any hesitation I had left. He opened his eyes, and the sheer exhaustion in his silver gaze made my heart ache. He didn't say a word. He just held out his arms. I didn't think. I just collided with his chest, wrapping my arms tightly around his waist. Julian let out a ragged sigh, burying his face in my neck, his massive arms wrapping around me like heavy iron chains, holding me so tightly my ribs protested. He inhaled my natural vanilla scent in huge, desperate gulps, seeking the grounding comfort only an Omega could provide to a heavily stressed alpha. Are you hurt? I asked frantically, my hands running over his back, checking for wounds. Julian, there's blood on your shirt. Not mine, he mumbled against my skin, his voice thick with exhaustion. It's handled, Leo. The Petrovs won't be making a move on you. Ever. Roman's father understands the new boundaries. The implications of his words were horrifying, but as he swayed slightly on his feet, holding on to me like I was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth, I pushed the horror aside. He was alive. He was here. Come on, I whispered softly, shifting my weight to support him. Let's get you to bed. I practically had to drag the terrifying air of the Vance Syndicate across the room. He was a dead weight of pure muscle. We reached the edge of the colossal bed, and he collapsed onto the mattress, pulling me down with him. I tried to pull away to take off his blood-stained shirt, but his grip on my waist was absolute. He rolled onto his back, pulling me entirely on top of him. My hands rested flat against his chest, right over his violently beating heart. Don't move, Julian commanded softly, his eyes already slipping shut. Just stay right here. Let me smell you. Let me know you're real. I lay there in the dark, sprawled completely over the most dangerous man in the city. The terrifying reality of my situation was undeniable. I was trapped in a golden cage, surrounded by violence, obsessed over by a predator who had rewritten my entire life from the shadows. But as Julian's breathing finally slowed into a deep, exhausted sleep, and his arms held me in an unbreakable, protective embrace, the terrifying thought bloomed in the back of my mind. I didn't want the door to open. I didn't want to leave the cage. Suddenly, a sharp, buzzing sound shattered the silence of the room. It wasn't Julian's encrypted phone on the desk. It was coming from my duffel bag in the corner of the room. My cheap, heavily outdated burner phone. The one I only used to call my grandmother, the one Julian supposedly didn't know the number to, was ringing. I froze, my blood turning to ice. Julian stirred beneath me, his brow furrowing in his sleep at the noise. I carefully, agonizingly slowly, pried myself out of his grip. I tiptoed across the dark room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I dug into the front pocket of my duffel bag and pulled out the glowing device. The caller ID was blocked. With a trembling finger, I hit accept and brought the phone to my ear. I didn't say a word. For a long moment, there was only the sound of static. Then a voice, entirely synthetically altered to disguise its pitch, spoke through the receiver. He thinks his fortress is impenetrable, little Omega, the voice whispered, sending a shockwave of terror straight down my spine. He thinks he erased all the threats. But he missed one. Look out the window, Leo. Look at the roof of the library. My breath caught in my throat. I slowly turned my head, staring through the massive bulletproof windows toward the Gothic spire of the campus library, illuminated by the moonlight. Standing on the edge of the roof, completely visible against the night sky, was a figure dressed entirely in black. And in their hands, resting on a tripod, was the long, unmistakable silhouette of a high-powered sniper rifle, pointed directly at the window of room 402. Pointed directly at the sleeping, vulnerable Alpha in the bed. "Julian can't protect you forever," the distorted voice whispered, followed by a low, chilling laugh. "Tick-tock, Leo. The real game is just beginning." The line went dead. End of Part 3. Part 4, Protocol Omega. The dead tone of the disconnected call echoed in my ear, a hollow, electronic hum that sounded exactly like the flatline of a heartbeat. My blood turned to absolute ice in my veins. I stood frozen in the center of the dark room, the burner phone slipping from my trembling fingers to hit the mahogany floor with a sickening clack. My eyes were completely locked on the Gothic spire of the library roof, illuminated by the pale, cold moonlight. The figure dressed in black hadn't moved. The long, lethal silhouette of the sniper rifle was completely stationary. And then I saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible flash of green light. A laser sight, cutting through the darkness, bypassing the reinforced steel of the door, ignoring the heavily armed guards in the hallway. It drifted across the massive expanse of the bulletproof glass, a silent messenger of death, until it came to rest directly on the center of the colossal bed, right on Julian's chest. "Julian!" The scream ripped out of my throat, raw and agonizing. My Omega instincts, previously suppressed and confused, completely took over with a terrifying, violent force. In that split second, I wasn't a scholarship student, and I wasn't a captive. I was an Omega watching his Alpha in the crosshairs. I didn't think. I didn't calculate the distance or the thickness of the glass. I just threw myself across the room with a speed I didn't know I possessed. I hit the edge of the mattress just as a suppressed thwip cut through the night, a sound so quiet it was almost instantly swallowed by the city wind, yet so loud in my mind it was deafening. I scrambled over the silk sheets and violently shoved my hands against Julian's broad shoulders, using every single ounce of my body weight to drag him sideways off the mattress. "Leo." Julian's voice was a groggy, confused rumble, rudely ripped from his exhausted sleep. Before he could process what was happening, the massive floor-to-ceiling window behind us exploded with a deafening crack. The window didn't shatter. The military-grade, bulletproof glass did exactly what it was engineered to do, catching the high-caliber round in a horrifying spiderweb of fractured safety glass. But the sheer kinetic force of the impact sent a shockwave through the room, knocking framed pictures off the walls and sending a shower of microscopic glass dust raining down over the bed. Julian and I hit the hard mahogany floor in a tangle of limbs, my smaller frame practically crushing the breath out of him as I lay entirely on top of his chest, shielding him. For a single, agonizing second, the only sound in the room was the frantic, ragged gasps of my own breathing. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the secondary shot, waiting for the glass to finally give way, waiting for the burning agony of a bullet. Instead, I felt massive, unyielding hands grip my hips. The groggy exhaustion vanished from Julian's body in an instant, replaced by a terrifying, coiled lethality. In a blur of motion so fast it made my head spin, our positions were reversed. Julian rolled us over, pinning me flat against the cold floor and covering my entire body with his own. He pressed my head firmly into the crook of his neck, his broad shoulders forming an impenetrable physical shield over me. His heart was hammering against my chest like a war drum. His scent, usually a dark, intoxicating blend of cedar and rain, violently spiked into pure, acidic ozone and burnt timber. The scent of an alpha preparing to tear the world apart to protect his mate. "Stay down," he commanded. His voice wasn't a yell, it was a deadly, vibrating growl that shook my bones. "Do not move a single muscle, Leo. Breathe through your mouth. Keep your eyes closed." I clung to his open shirt, my fingers digging desperately into the hard muscles of his back, entirely overwhelmed by the adrenaline and his suffocating pheromones. "The window." I sobbed into his collarbone, the terror finally breaking through my shock. "Julian, the window." "The glass held," he muttered, his eyes locked on the fractured pane above us, analyzing the trajectory of the bullet hole. "It's a heavy armor-piercing round, but it didn't penetrate the secondary layer. We are safe." The electronic lock on the heavy steel door suddenly beeped frantically. A second later, the door was violently kicked open. "Boss!" Marcus roared, sweeping the room with a heavy assault rifle, Elias right behind him, their faces pale with shock. Shots fired. Perimeter breach. Lights out. Now, Julian barked, never lifting his weight off me. Elias slammed his fist against the master switch, plunging the entire penthouse into absolute darkness. The only light remaining was the eerie, fractured moonlight spilling through the cracked window. "Sniper on the library roof," Julian ordered, his voice echoing in the dark, cold and utterly devoid of emotion. "Coordinate with the outer security ring. I want the academic wing locked down. Nobody leaves this campus. I want that shooter found, and I want them brought to me alive. Do you understand? Alive." "Copy that," Marcus growled, tapping his earpiece and relaying the orders in rapid, tactical code. "Elias, secure the hallway. Nobody gets within 50 feet of this door." The heavy door slammed shut again, the deadbolts sliding back into place with a definitive thunk. The silence that followed was heavy, choked with the smell of gunpowder and the metallic tang of fear. Julian remained draped over me on the floor for what felt like an eternity. He was waiting, listening. His chest rose and fell against mine in a slow, calculated rhythm, deliberately trying to force my frantic breathing to sync with his own. Slowly, carefully, he lifted his head. The darkness hid his expression, but I could feel the intense, burning weight of his silver eyes locked onto my face. He reached down, his large hand cupping my cheek. His thumb wiped away a stray tear I hadn't even realized had fallen. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough and incredibly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence that had just erupted around us. "And no," I stuttered, my teeth chattering as the adrenaline crash hit me. The cold of the floor was seeping into my pajamas. "I'm okay. You?" "I am entirely unharmed," Julian replied smoothly. He shifted his weight, sitting up and pulling me with him until I was securely tucked into his lap, my back pressed against his chest. He wrapped his arms around me, burying his face in my hair, inhaling a massive breath of my vanilla scent. "Because of you." I squeezed my eyes shut, the memory of the green laser flashing behind my eyelids. "They knew," I whispered, my voice trembling. "They knew exactly where the bed was. They knew you were asleep." Julian went perfectly still behind me. "What do you mean they knew?" I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat feeling like a golf ball. I pointed a shaky finger toward the corner of the room where my duffel bag lay. "My phone. The burner phone. It rang just before it happened. A distorted voice told me to look at the library roof. They said you couldn't protect me forever. They said the real game was just beginning." The temperature in the room plummeted. The comforting heat radiating from Julian's body instantly turned rigid. He slowly released his grip on my waist, setting me gently onto the floor. He stood up, his towering silhouette blocking out the moonlight. He walked over to where the cheap plastic burner phone lay abandoned on the floor. He picked it up, his thumb grazing over the cracked screen. "A burner phone," Julian said, his voice dangerously soft. "An untraceable, unregistered piece of plastic. In my highly secure, heavily vetted penthouse. How long have you had this, Leo?" I scrambled to my feet, suddenly feeling incredibly small and vulnerable. The alpha who had just shielded me with his body was gone. The ruthless heir to the Vance Syndicate had returned, and he was staring at me like I was a puzzle he had failed to solve. "Since freshman year," I admitted, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I only use it to call my grandmother at the care facility. My official student phone is monitored by the academy, and I didn't want anyone to know about her. I didn't want her to become leverage." Julian stared at me for a long time. The silence stretched until it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders. "You hid it from me," he finally said. "I hid it from everyone." I protested, taking a step forward. "Julian, I didn't know they could track it. I didn't give the number to anyone. I swear." Suddenly, Julian's hand shot out. He didn't grab me. He grabbed the heavy, solid oak chair sitting next to his desk and violently hurled it across the room. It shattered against the far wall with a deafening crash, splintering into dozens of pieces. I flinched backward, clapping my hands over my mouth to stifle a scream. Julian didn't look at the destroyed chair. He looked at the burner phone in his hand. With a terrifyingly calm, deliberate motion, he crushed the plastic device in his massive fist. The sound of circuits snapping and glass cracking echoed in the dead silence. He let the pieces fall to the floor like useless garbage. "They didn't track the phone, Leo," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave, raw with a dark, terrifying realization. "They tracked the signal tower. They bypassed my firewall. They breached my secure perimeter not with bullets, but with data. And they used the one thing I didn't know existed to get to you." He closed the distance between us in 3 long strides. He didn't stop until he was looming over me, his chest practically brushing against mine. He reached out, grabbing my jaw with a grip that was entirely uncompromising, forcing me to look up into his storm-gray eyes. "I spent 2 years neutralizing every external threat to your existence," he growled, his thumb pressing firmly against the pulse point on my neck. "I tore apart the Academy's infrastructure to ensure your safety. And the entire time, you were carrying a live beacon in your pocket. A backdoor right into the heart of my sanctuary." "I'm sorry," I choked out, fresh tears welling in my eyes. The guilt was suffocating. I had brought the enemy right to his doorstep. I had almost gotten him killed. I didn't know. I just wanted to talk to my family. Julian's expression softened ever so slightly, the blazing fury in his eyes giving way to a deep, possessive desperation. He dropped his hand from my jaw and instead cupped the back of my neck, pulling my forehead to his chest. "You don't apologize," he murmured against my hair, his arms wrapping around me like heavy iron bands, pulling me flush against his hard body. "This is my failure. Arrogant. I thought I had accounted for every variable. But I forgot the most important one." "What variable?" I whispered into his ruined, blood-stained shirt. "That you are still trying to hold onto a world outside of me," Julian stated, the sheer possessiveness in his tone making my breath catch. He pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes. "That ends tonight, Leo." "What do you mean?" Panic flared in my chest. "Your grandmother will be moved," Julian ordered, his tone slipping into absolute command. "By dawn, she will be transferred to a private, highly secure Vance facility. She will have the best medical care in the country, guarded by my personal men. The Petrovs, or whoever sent that shooter, will never find her." My eyes went wide. "Julian, you can't just uproot her life. She's old, she's fragile." "I can and I will," he interrupted, his silver eyes flashing. "Because if they used a phone to terrorize you today, they will use her to manipulate you tomorrow. I am completely severing every single thread that ties you to the outside world. From this second forward, Leo, I am your only tether. I am your only family. I am your only protector." The finality in his words was absolute. He wasn't asking for my permission. He was declaring a new law of reality. He was sealing the golden cage, locking it tight, and throwing away the key. And the most terrifying part wasn't the loss of my freedom. The most terrifying part was the deep, undeniable surge of relief that washed over my Omega instincts. The dark, primal part of my brain wanted to be hidden away by him. It wanted to be completely consumed by his protection. Julian turned away from me, walking toward the cracked, spider-webbed window. The moonlight cast fragmented, distorted shadows across his broad shoulders. He stood there for a long moment, staring out at the library roof, analyzing the trajectory of the bullet that had been inches away from ending his life. "That wasn't a Petrov hit," Julian said quietly into the darkness. I hugged my arms around my chest, suddenly feeling incredibly cold. "How do you know?" "You embarrassed Roman in the dining hall. You practically declared war on them. Roman is arrogant, and his father is brutal, but they are traditionalists," Julian explained, running a hand over the smooth, undamaged side of the glass pane. "They deal in street violence, car bombs, and close-quarters intimidation. A suppressed, armor-piercing round fired from a mile away in the dead of night, accompanied by a synchronized, encrypted phone call designed specifically for psychological torture, that requires a level of tactical sophistication the Petrovs don't possess." He turned to look at me, and the expression on his face made my blood run cold. It was a look of pure, calculated realization. A predator realizing there was a bigger monster in the jungle. "Whoever took that shot didn't actually want to kill me," Julian continued, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "If they had the technology to bypass my firewall and trace a burner phone, they would have known the exact specifications of this glass. They knew a single round wouldn't penetrate. They knew I would survive. Then why shoot?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why risk the exposure? Why call me?" "To send a message," Julian stated grimly. He walked back to his desk, pulling out the heavy metal drawer that contained his encrypted communications equipment. "To show me that my fortress is an illusion. To prove that they can touch you whenever they want." He pulled out a sleek, heavy satellite phone. It looked entirely different from the one he had destroyed. It was black, bulky, and didn't have a screen, only a keypad. "Who are you calling?" I asked, taking a hesitant step forward. Julian didn't answer immediately. He dialed a string of numbers with practiced precision, holding the heavy device to his ear. He looked at me, his silver eyes completely devoid of the warmth he had shown me just moments ago. He was fully submerged in the underworld now. "I spent years trying to keep the darkest parts of my family's empire away from this academy," Julian said, his voice eerily calm as the phone rang on the other end. I tried to play by the unspoken rules of the syndicates. I tried to keep the violence contained to the shadows. The line connected with a sharp click. "It's Vance," Julian spoke into the receiver, his tone carrying the absolute, terrifying authority of a king commanding an army. "Protocol Omega is active. Burn the treaties. I want the cleanup crews on standby, and I want the hounds released." A long pause followed as whoever was on the other end processed the order. I didn't know what the hounds were, but the name alone sent a shiver of pure terror down my spine. "Yes," Julian confirmed coldly into the phone. "Every single shadow in this city. If they breathe near the academy, erase them. If they look at the residential tower, blind them. And find the rat in my security detail. Nobody breaches my digital perimeter without an inside man." He hung up the phone, tossing it onto the mahogany desk. The heavy thud echoed in the silent room. He had just declared an all-out, unrestricted war. He had unleashed the full, terrifying might of the Vance Syndicate upon the city, and he had done it all because a sniper had pointed a laser at my chest. Julian walked slowly back to where I was standing. He didn't stop until he was looming over me again. He reached out, his large hands gripping my shoulders. His touch was firm, grounding, but laced with a possessive intensity that made it hard to breathe. "The game they want to play has changed, Leo," Julian murmured, lowering his head until his lips brushed against the shell of my ear. His breath was hot against my skin, heavily laced with his dominant, protective cedar scent. "They wanted to prove they could touch you. Now, I am going to prove that trying to take what is mine carries a price they cannot afford to pay." He pulled back, his eyes flashing with a terrifying, beautiful darkness. He leaned down and pressed a hard, bruising kiss to the exact spot on my neck where my scent glands were located, deliberately and aggressively marking me with his alpha pheromones. It was a brand, a warning to the entire world. "Get some sleep, little Omega," Julian whispered, his thumb tracing my lower lip. "Because tomorrow, we are going to burn this city to the ground." End of Part 4. Part 5, Total Lockdown. The morning did not break over room 402. It was actively denied entry. Sometime during the chaotic, adrenaline-fueled hours before dawn, Julian's cleanup crew had arrived. They moved with a terrifying, silent efficiency that spoke of years of burying secrets. While Julian sat on the edge of the mattress, his body angled to shield me completely from view, for men in unmarked tactical gear had sealed the massive, spiderwebbed window with heavy, reinforced steel shutters. The hydraulic hiss and heavy clank of the metal locking into place sounded entirely too much like the door of a vault slamming shut. The penthouse was now completely cut off from the outside world, illuminated only by the harsh, artificial glow of the security lamps and the dim light of Julian's mahogany desk. The air in the room was thick and heavy, completely saturated with the aggressive, territorial scent of burnt cedar and dark rain. It was a physical weight pressing against my chest, a constant, suffocating reminder that my alpha was currently operating on pure, lethal instinct. I sat near the headboard, the thick silk blankets pulled up to my chin, my knees drawn to my chest. I hadn't slept a single wink. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the tiny, venomous flash of that green laser sight resting against Julian's heart. Julian was standing by the desk, his back to me. He had finally discarded the blood-stained shirt from the night before, replacing it with a fresh, crisp black button-down, though he had left the top buttons undone, revealing the intricate, dark ink of his syndicate tattoos. He was speaking softly into the heavy satellite phone, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that offered absolutely no comfort. "I don't care about the collateral damage to the East Side docks," Julian ordered, his tone entirely devoid of empathy. "If the Petrovs are using those warehouses to move weapons into the city, burn them to the waterline. I want Roman's father to wake up to the smell of ash." He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. His hand gripped the edge of the mahogany desk so tightly his knuckles were completely white. "And the mole?" Julian demanded, the temperature in the room seemingly dropping 10 degrees. "You've had 6 hours, Victor. I unleashed the hounds to hunt, not to drag their feet. Someone inside this academy bypassed my digital perimeter and gave that sniper my exact coordinates. I want a name, and when you get it, you don't touch them. You bring them to the sub-basement of the residential tower. I will handle the extraction of information myself." I shivered, pulling the blankets tighter around myself. The casual, terrifying way he spoke of torture, of burning down city blocks, was a stark reminder of who I was actually sharing a bed with. Julian Vance wasn't just a powerful student. He was an apex predator commanding an army of monsters. And he was doing it all to build an impenetrable wall around me. Julian hung up the phone with a sharp click. He stood completely still for a moment, his broad shoulders rising and falling with a heavy sigh, before he finally turned to face me. The immediate softening of his features was jarring. The ruthless mafia boss vanished, replaced instantly by the fiercely protective Alpha. His storm-gray eyes swept over my huddled form, taking in my pale face and the way my hands were trembling where they gripped the blankets. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, the heavy steel-toed boots he had put on making no sound on the mahogany floor. He sat on the edge of the mattress, the sheer weight of him dipping the expensive mattress. He didn't speak. He simply reached out and gently pried my white-knuckled fingers away from the silk sheets. His hands were incredibly warm. He enveloped my trembling hands in his thumbs smoothing over my knuckles in a slow, rhythmic motion. "You're freezing, Leo," he murmured, his voice thick with a low, rumbling purr that vibrated deep in his chest. It was a sound entirely meant to soothe the distressed Omega, an instinctual acoustic blanket designed to lower my heart rate. "I'm not cold," I whispered, my voice incredibly fragile. I can't stop seeing it. The laser. The window. If I hadn't woken up, if that phone hadn't rung." "Stop." Julian's command was soft but absolute. He shifted closer, pulling me forward until my forehead was resting against his chest. I could hear the steady, powerful thud of his heartbeat beneath the black fabric of his shirt. "You cannot live in the what-ifs, Leo. That is how the enemy poisons your mind. You are alive. I am alive. The bullet did not penetrate. Those are the only facts that matter. But they're out there," I protested weakly, my face buried in his chest. The smell of his dark cedar scent was overwhelming, completely drowning out the lingering metallic tang of gunpowder in the room. "And you're starting a war. I heard you on the phone, Julian. You're burning down warehouses. You're hunting people." Julian's arm wrapped tightly around my waist, lifting me slightly until I was practically sitting in his lap. He pressed a firm, lingering kiss to the crown of my head. "I am doing what is necessary to ensure that you never have to look over your shoulder again. The syndicates in this city only respect one currency, and that is absolute, uncompromising violence. They tried to put a bullet in my chest to show you that you aren't safe with me. I have to prove them wrong. Brutally. I don't want people to die because of me," I confessed, a tear slipping down my cheek to soak into his shirt. The sheer guilt of being the catalyst for a mafia war was threatening to crush me. Julian pulled back, just enough to look me in the eyes. His expression was fiercely intense, his silver eyes flashing with a possessive darkness that completely paralyzed me. He brought his hands up to cup my face, his thumbs gently wiping away my tears. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, intimate whisper. "You are not the cause of this violence. You are the treasure they are trying to steal. The violence is my language. It is my burden to carry, not yours. Your only job, your only responsibility in this entire world is to stay right here, in my arms, and let me protect you." Before I could even process the heavy, possessive weight of his words, the electronic lock on the reinforced door beeped 3 times, a rapid, urgent sequence. Julian's demeanor flipped in a microsecond. He didn't let go of me, but his entire body went completely rigid. He shifted his weight, angling his body so that he was completely between me and the door, his right hand slipping smoothly beneath his suit jacket to rest on the grip of a concealed weapon. "Enter," Julian commanded, his voice echoing loudly in the steel-shuttered room. The heavy door swung open, and Marcus stepped inside, followed closely by Elias. But they weren't alone. Trailing behind them was a man I had never seen before. He was tall, entirely too thin, and dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit that seemed to hang awkwardly on his skeletal frame. His face was sharp, pale, and completely devoid of any emotion, his eyes hidden behind dark, round sunglasses despite being indoors. He moved with a completely silent, almost unnatural grace. My Omega instincts instantly flared, not with attraction, but with pure, unadulterated terror. The scent rolling off the new arrival wasn't dominant. It was entirely absent. He smelled like nothing. Like a vacuum. Like death. Julian felt my violent flinch. He tightened his grip on my waist, a low, warning growl rumbling deep in his throat. It was a clear, instinctual signal to the newcomer. "Look at him, and I will rip your throat out." "Boss," Marcus said, his voice tight, his eyes darting nervously toward the pale man. "Victor is here. He says he has the name you requested." Julian didn't relax his posture. He kept me firmly tucked against his side, his eyes locked on Victor. "Speak," Julian ordered coldly. Victor stepped forward, stopping precisely at the edge of the invisible boundary Julian had established around the bed. He didn't look at me. He kept his gaze fixed entirely on Julian's chest. When he spoke, his voice was smooth, cultured, and chillingly polite. "The digital breach was remarkably sophisticated, Mr. Vance," Victor reported, folding his thin hands behind his back. "It utilized a localized encrypted mesh network to bypass the Academy's primary firewall. However, the hardware required to maintain that network couldn't be brought in from the outside. It had to be physically installed inside the residential tower's server room. Someone with high-level access clearance placed the tap." "A name, Victor," Julian snapped, his patience completely non-existent. "I don't need a technical lecture. I need a target." Victor reached into his inner pocket and withdrew a single folded piece of paper. He held it out. Elias immediately stepped forward, took the paper, and handed it to Julian. Julian unfolded the paper with one hand, his other arm still wrapped protectively around me. I watched his eyes scan the single line of text. I saw the exact moment the realization hit him. The storm gray of his eyes darkened into absolute pitch-black fury. The muscles in his jaw ticked violently. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, Julian lowered the paper. He didn't look at Victor. He looked down at me. The look on his face made my stomach drop into a bottomless abyss. It was a mixture of rage, vindication, and a dark, twisted sort of pity. "Leo," Julian said, his voice dangerously soft. "During your 2 years in the East Wing, you had a study partner. A beta. An upperclassman who helped you with your registration paperwork when you first arrived." My breath hitched. My mind immediately flashed to a familiar face. "Simon," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Simon Hayes? He's a scholarship student like me. He works in the administration office part-time to pay for his books. He's my friend." Julian's hand moved from my waist to gently cup the back of my neck. His thumb stroked the sensitive skin directly over my scent glands. "He isn't a beta, Leo. And he certainly isn't your friend. He is an unregistered alpha, and he has been on the Petrov payroll since the day he set foot on this campus." "No," I gasped, violently shaking my head. "No, that's impossible. Simon helped me get my scent blockers. He covered for me when I was sick. He was grooming you," Julian interrupted, his voice cutting through my denial like a scalpel. The brutal honesty in his tone was devastating. "The Petrovs knew I was watching you. They knew I was clearing the board to make room for you. So they planted Simon. He gained your trust. He monitored your movements. He ensured you stayed completely isolated and dependent on him, waiting for the perfect moment to use you as leverage." The room started to spin. The artificial lights seemed to pulse in time with my racing heart. My friend, the only person at St. Jude Academy who had ever shown me kindness before Julian, was a spy. He was the one who had installed the tap. He was the one who had given the sniper my location. He was the one who had almost gotten Julian killed. A sudden, violent wave of nausea washed over me. I slapped my hands over my mouth, a choked sob tearing from my throat. Everything I thought I knew about my life was a meticulously constructed lie. I had never been safe. I had just been a pawn on a chessboard, completely blind to the game being played around me. "Get him," Julian ordered, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the room, completely devoid of mercy. "Already secured, boss," Victor replied smoothly, a chilling hint of a smile touching the corner of his lips. "He is currently restrained in the sub-basement interrogation room, awaiting your arrival." Julian nodded slowly. He finally released his grip on my neck, carefully standing up from the bed. He adjusted his cuffs, his posture perfectly straight, the terrifying mantle of the Vance Syndicate air settling heavily upon his shoulders. "Marcus, Elias, nobody enters this room. Nobody leaves. If the building catches fire, you burn with it until I return," Julian commanded. "Yes, boss," the 2 massive guards replied in unison. Julian turned back to me. I was shaking violently now, the betrayal tearing my world apart piece by piece. I looked up at him, my eyes wide and entirely terrified. I didn't recognize the man standing over me. The gentle alpha who had held me through the night was gone, replaced by an executioner. "Julian," I whispered, reaching out with a trembling hand to grab the fabric of his dark trousers. What are you going to do to him?" Julian looked down at my hand, gripping his leg. He slowly reached down and gently detached my fingers, weaving his large hand through mine. He lifted my hand to his lips, pressing a cold, hard kiss against my knuckles. "I am going to ask him a few questions, Leo," Julian said quietly, his silver eyes completely dead. "And then, I am going to make absolutely certain that he never speaks another word to anyone ever again." "You're going to kill him," I breathed, the reality of the situation finally shattering my denial. "Julian, please. He's just a student. Maybe they forced him. Maybe. He put a target on your chest, Julian snarled, his voice suddenly violently loud, making me flinch hard against the headboard. The sudden spike of his furious pheromones made my eyes water. He brought a sniper to my window. He tried to take what is mine. There is no forgiveness for that. There is no mercy. There is only the consequence. He dropped my hand. He turned his back on me and began walking toward the heavy steel door. Victor and the guards stepped aside to let him pass. Julian, wait. I cried out, practically throwing myself off the mattress. My feet hit the cold mahogany floor, but I didn't care. I couldn't let him do this. I couldn't let him become a murderer for my sake. But I had barely taken 2 steps when Marcus and Elias instantly moved, their massive bodies forming an impenetrable wall of muscle and dark suits between me and the door. Back to bed, Leo, Marcus growled, his voice completely authoritative, his hand resting menacingly on his weapon. Boss's orders. I stopped dead in my tracks, staring at the broad backs of my guards. I looked past them, catching one final glimpse of Julian as he stepped out into the hallway. He didn't look back. The heavy reinforced door slammed shut with a deafening thud, the deadbolts sliding into place with terrifying finality. I was completely alone. The silence in the room was deafening. The golden cage had officially been locked, and I was entirely trapped inside with the agonizing knowledge of what my alpha was doing in the dark underneath the academy. I slowly backed away from the guards, my legs trembling so badly I could barely support my own weight. I collapsed onto the edge of the mattress, pulling my knees to my chest, completely overwhelmed by the suffocating scent of dark cedar that clung to every single fiber of the room. I was Leo Astor, an unregistered Omega, a scholarship student, and as of today, I was the reason a war had started, and the reason my only friend was about to die. And the most terrifying, twisted part of it all, as my Omega instincts purred in the back of my mind, drunk on the lingering pheromones of Julian's absolute, murderous protection, I realized I couldn't bring myself to hate him for it. End of Part 5. Part 6, Silent Shackles. Time ceased to exist inside room 402. With the heavy steel shutters completely sealing off the outside world, I was left in an artificial twilight, entirely consumed by the agonizing weight. I don't know how many hours passed. It could have been 3, it could have been 10. I spent the first eternity pacing the length of the mahogany floor until my legs ached, my bare feet silent against the wood. Marcus and Elias remained completely immobile by the reinforced door, acting as twin statues of lethal intent. They didn't speak to me. They didn't even look at me. Their absolute silence only amplified the deafening roar of my own chaotic thoughts. Simon. The name echoed in my mind like a cruel joke. The upperclassman who had shared his notes with me, who had laughed with me in the library, who had known exactly how terrified I was of being discovered. He had been a phantom placed in my life by a rival syndicate, studying my every weakness, waiting for the perfect moment to pull the trigger. And Julian was down in the dark, extracting the price of that betrayal. I curled up on the massive king-sized bed, wrapping Julian's discarded suit jacket around my shoulders. The dark cedar and rain scent woven into the expensive fabric was the only thing keeping me from completely losing my mind. My Omega instincts were in a state of frantic overdrive, yearning for the Alpha who was out there spilling blood to secure our perimeter. I felt nauseous, terrified, and entirely heartbroken, yet beneath it all, a dark, terrifying sense of devotion was taking root. Suddenly, the electronic lock on the heavy steel door chirped. I bolted upright, dropping the jacket. Marcus and Elias instantly stepped back, standing at absolute attention. The heavy deadbolts slid open with a definitive thunk. Julian stepped into the room. He didn't look like the immaculate, untouchable heir of the Vance Syndicate anymore. He looked like a god of war who had just walked through hell and brought the fire back with him. His crisp black shirt was ruined, the sleeves rolled up to reveal his heavily tattooed forearms, the fabric stained with dark, unmistakable splashes of crimson. His knuckles were split and bruised, raw from violence. His dark hair was messy, falling into his stormy silver eyes. But it was his scent that hit me the hardest. It was a suffocating, overwhelming wave of pure, dominant alpha pheromones, laced with the metallic tang of adrenaline, the sharp ozone of violence, and the cold, terrifying scent of absolute victory. The door sealed shut behind him, locking Marcus and Elias outside. We were entirely alone. Julian leaned heavily against the steel door for a moment, his chest heaving as he closed his eyes. The sheer exhaustion rolling off his massive frame was palpable. He looked entirely drained, a monster who had finally finished hunting and had nothing left in the tank. "Julian," I whispered, my voice breaking the heavy silence. His eyes snapped open. The lethal, deadened look he had worn when he left to interrogate Simon vanished the second his gaze landed on me. The storm gray cleared, replaced by a desperate, possessive warmth. He didn't say a word. He crossed the room in long, heavy strides. I didn't back away. I couldn't. Julian fell to his knees right at the edge of the bed, burying his face in my lap. His massive arms wrapped around my waist, pulling me to the edge of the mattress until my legs were tangled with his. He let out a ragged, shaking breath that vibrated against my stomach, inhaling my natural vanilla scent like a drowning man breaking the surface of the water. "It's over," Julian rumbled against my pajamas, his voice incredibly hoarse. "It's entirely over, Leo." I slowly lifted my trembling hands and buried them in his dark hair, my fingers gently messaging his scalp. The simple contact sent a jolt of electricity through both of us. "What happened?" I asked softly, terrified of the answer, but needing to know. Julian lifted his head. His silver eyes searched mine, analyzing my expression, looking for the fear he expected to see. "The Petrovs are crippled. Their supply lines on the east side are ash. Roman and his father have been forcefully escorted out of the city limits by my father's lieutenants. They will never step foot in this territory again." He paused, his jaw tightening, the bruised skin over his knuckles stretching. "And Simon will no longer be an issue." He provided the names of every single contact he had within the academy. "The board of directors has been entirely purged. As of an hour ago, St. Jude Academy is exclusively Vance territory." I swallowed hard, the reality of the violence he had orchestrated crashing over me. Simon was gone. The boy I thought was my friend had been erased from existence because he dared to threaten the space I occupied. "Are you afraid of me?" Julian asked, his voice dropping to a vulnerable whisper that seemed entirely wrong coming from a man of his immense power. He kept his arms wrapped tightly around my waist, refusing to let me pull away, even though I hadn't tried. I looked down at his bruised knuckles, at the bloodstains on his shirt, at the terrifying, beautiful face of the Alpha who had burned a city to keep me safe. Every logical fiber of my being screamed that I should run. I was an unregistered scholarship student trapped in a mafia war zone. But my Omega instincts sang a completely different song. They recognized a protector who had proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that he would move heaven and earth to shield me. "I'm terrified of the world you live in," I answered honestly, my voice trembling but my gaze steady. "But I am not afraid of you, Julian. Never you." A profound, staggering relief washed over Julian's face. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. He stood up slowly, towering over me once more, but the menacing aura was gone. "I need to wash this off," he muttered, looking down at his ruined shirt with disgust. "I don't want this filth anywhere near you." He walked into the massive ensuite bathroom, leaving the door slightly ajar. I heard the shower turn on, the rush of water echoing in the quiet penthouse. I sat on the bed, processing the sheer magnitude of the shift in my reality. Yesterday morning, my biggest concern was a statistics exam. Tonight, I was the sole reason the underworld of the city had been violently rearranged. Julian had severed every single tie I had to my old life. My grandmother was safely hidden away in a Vance facility. My only friend was a traitor who had been dealt with. I had no one left. No one but the terrifying, beautiful monster currently washing the blood off his hands in the next room. I realized, with a startling clarity, that the golden cage wasn't just physical anymore. It was psychological. Julian had meticulously removed every alternative, leaving himself as the only pillar I could lean on. It was incredibly manipulative. It was deeply possessive. And heaven help me, it felt like home. When Julian emerged from the bathroom, the transformation was complete. The blood and the grime of the underworld had been washed away. He was wearing dark, loose sweatpants, his broad, incredibly muscular chest bare, the intricate black ink of his syndicate tattoos damp and striking against his pale skin. His wet hair fell softly over his forehead, making him look surprisingly young, surprisingly human. The harsh, metallic scent of violence was gone, replaced entirely by the clean, intoxicating aroma of dark cedar and rain. He didn't go to his desk. He walked straight to the bed. I instinctively shifted back, making room for him, but he didn't lie down. He crawled over the mattress, his movements deliberate and predatory, until he was kneeling directly over me, trapping me completely between his massive thighs. My breath caught in my throat. I stared up at him, completely paralyzed by the sheer intensity burning in his silver eyes. "The perimeter is secure, Leo," Julian murmured, his voice a low, vibrating hum that made my bones ache. "The threats have been neutralized." The city knows exactly what happens when they try to touch what is mine. He leaned down, his large hands resting flat on the mattress on either side of my head, completely caging me in. But there is one final vulnerability. What vulnerability? I whispered, my heart hammering frantically against my ribs. You are still unregistered, Julian stated, his gaze dropping heavily to the side of my neck, right where my scent glands were pulsing frantically under my skin. To the rest of the world, you are an unclaimed Omega. A prize to be stolen. A weakness waiting to be exploited. I will not allow that. Not for another second. I knew exactly what he was saying. The implications made the room spin. In the Omegaverse, a claim wasn't just a physical mark. It was an absolute, unbreakable psychological and biological bond. It meant submission. It meant absolute belonging. Once an alpha marked an omega, their scents permanently merged. The entire world would know, instantly and undeniably, that I belonged to Julian Vance. Julian, I started, my voice failing me. I told you I was playing for keeps, he interrupted softly, his thumb gently brushing against my jawline, tilting my head to the side to completely expose my neck. I tore my own life apart to make room for you. I burned my enemies to ash to keep you safe. I am offering you the absolute protection of the Vance name for the rest of your life. He leaned in closer, his hot breath ghosting over my sensitive skin. But I need you to give me this. I need the world to smell my scent on your skin. I need them to see my mark. I need to know that you are finally, truly, perfectly shackled to me. Silent shackles. The words echoed in my mind. He wasn't giving me a choice, not really. The cage was already locked. But as his lips gently brushed against my pulse point, sending a blinding flash of pure, agonizing pleasure straight down my spine, I realized I didn't want a choice. I reached up, my trembling fingers tangling in his damp hair, and gently pulled him closer. Do it, I whispered into the quiet room, surrendering the very last piece of my invisible life. Julian let out a ragged, triumphant growl that vibrated through my entire body. He didn't hesitate. He opened his mouth and sank his teeth directly into the sensitive flesh over my scent gland. A sharp, brilliant pain flared for a fraction of a second, instantly swallowed by a crashing, overwhelming tidal wave of pure alpha pheromones. It felt like being struck by lightning. The bond snapped into place with a terrifying, beautiful violence. My natural vanilla scent violently exploded, immediately intertwining and tangling with his dark cedar and rain, creating a completely new, unbreakable aroma that filled the entire penthouse. I gasped, my back arching off the mattress, my hands desperately clutching at his broad shoulders as the biological reality of the claim rewrote my very existence. I could feel his heartbeat sinking with mine. I could feel his protective fury settling over my mind like a heavy, impenetrable blanket. Julian held the bite for a long, agonizingly perfect minute, ensuring the mark was deep, permanent, and absolutely undeniable. When he finally pulled back, he didn't go far. He rested his forehead against mine, both of us panting heavily, entirely drunk on the sheer intensity of the newly forged bond. He looked down at the dark, bruised bite mark blooming on my neck. A look of absolute, terrifying satisfaction washed over his face. He gently licked the small drop of blood that had welled up, sealing the claim. Mine, Julian whispered, the word carrying the absolute weight of a king claiming his throne. Forever. Yours, I echoed, the word slipping past my lips with an ease that terrified me. Julian shifted his weight, pulling me completely into his arms, burying me against his chest. I wrapped my arms around his waist, burying my face in the crook of his neck, completely surrounded by his heat, his scent, and his absolute authority. The next morning, the heavy steel shutters finally rolled up, allowing the bright, harsh sunlight of the city to flood into room 402. The world outside the bulletproof glass was exactly the same, yet entirely different. The academy still stood. The legacy students still roamed the halls. The syndicates still operated in the shadows. But I was no longer Leo the Ghost. I was no longer the invisible scholarship student hiding in the East Wing, desperately trying to survive in a world of predators. I stood by the window, wearing one of Julian's oversized black shirts, feeling the heavy, possessive ache of the claim mark on my neck. I watched the students crossing the courtyard far below, knowing that by noon, the entire city would know exactly who I was. They would know that the heir to the Vance Empire had finally taken a mate, and they would know better than to ever look in my direction again. Julian walked up behind me, wrapping his massive arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. His scent completely enveloped me, a constant, physical reminder of the golden cage I had willingly locked myself inside. "What are you thinking about, little Omega?" he murmured, pressing a soft kiss to my marked neck. I leaned back into his solid chest, looking out at the city that now belonged to the Alpha holding me. I'm thinking, I smiled softly, the silent shackles finally resting comfortably around my wrists, that I really hope I didn't miss too much in advanced statistics. End of story.